Hello and welcome to the SPX panel, Reverberations of History and Myth. I'm Craig Fischer and I teach film and comics at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. And on this panel, I'm joined by the following creators in alphabetical order. And I'm going to have to learn how to use the clicker while I do this, walking and chewing gum here. But oh, it's actually... Frances Cordelia Beaver describes herself as, quote, a trans woman, artist, storyteller, musician, and performer living and working in Philadelphia. Her first graphic novel, 2021 self-published On a Cute One, uses the myth of Medusa to tell the story of a trans woman with snake hair who turns a youth ranger, aka a Boy Scout, to stone. She's also published several autobiographical short-form zines, including the spiritual Visit Delco, about her hometown, and that's also excerpted in On a Cute One, and Spirits Hung Over at Work in 2023. Her current project is Give My Best to Your Kind, about a monkey who, after declaring itself the first human being, quote, barbecues and eats its own ribs, transforming into Eve overnight after an evening of hallucinogenic indigestion, close quote. Now it's not working in that direction. Okay. There we go. Anders Nilsen, quote, artist, cartoonist, illustrator, curator, skateboard enthusiast, close quote, is one of America's premier graphic novelists. His work ranges from the experimental memoirs Don't Go Where I Can't Follow and The End, to philosophical and myth-inflected stories like Big Questions and shorter pieces in Rage of Poseidon and God and the Devil at War in the Garden. The first volume of Tongues, a narrative about human and mythic wars and the growing friendship between a punished Prometheus and his liver-eating eagle, has been published this year in collected form by Pantheon. Inspirational quote, you're allowed to fuck up when you're drawing, you're allowed to get it wrong, and sometimes that's the way you discover something interesting, close quote. Mimi Pond is another of America's premier graphic novelists. She began her career in several different creative fields, TV and magazine writing among them, but found her primary vocation writing and drawing cartoons for the New York Times, the Village Voice, the Los Angeles Times, the National Lampoon, and 17 magazine, and in such humor books as The Valley Girl's Guide to Life and A Groom of One's Own during the 1980s and 1990s. In the last decade or so, Pond has shifted into long-form graphic memoir with Over Easy, and its sequel, The Customer Is Always Wrong, chronicles of her job as a waitress in an Oakland diner. Due in bookstores soon and available in SPX right now is Do Admit, the Mitford Sisters And Me, which mixes personal reflection with the transgressive, historically bold lives of famous sisters Diana, Jessica, Unity, Nancy, Deborah, and Pamela Mitford. And finally, Ben Wickey grew up in Rockport, Massachusetts, just 30 miles from Salem, home of the infamous witch trials, and described by Wickey as, quote, a wonderful microcosm of spookiness, close quote. After studying at the California Institute of the Arts, he began working on cinema crews. He was part of the animation team for the feature-length Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, while devoting off hours to researching the Salem trials in preparation for a personal yet still historical project. After soliciting advice from Alan Moore, who became a kind of mentor to Wickey and who asked him to draw the Old Moore's Lives of the Great Enchanters pages in Alan and Steve Moore's, no relation, 2024 Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic, Wickey finished what became a 500-page graphic novel titled More Weight, a Salem Story, coming out this month from Top Shelf and also available here at the show. Join me in welcoming these fantastically diverse and prodigiously talented panelists. Okay. To begin, I wonder if we should define the word myth in our discussion. One way to use the word myth is to define those stories from our shared narrative past, like Prometheus and Rage of Poseidon and Tongues, Anders, and the version of yourself in Medusa is On a Cute One, Frances. What compels you to resurrect and revamp characters like Prometheus and Medusa to tell new stories about them? Are they metaphors for a point or message you're striving to express? Are they something else? Are they both? What do you think? Who goes first?
A lot of those characters, from Greek mythology, just kind of live in my head. I read I was sort of obsessed with Greek mythology along with Marvel comics mythology from an early age, and so those stories are sort of just there. They're the kind of foundational stories in my brain, and of course the Greek ones don't have a copyright barrier, so you can go and mess around with them as much as you want.
Okay, Frances?
Yeah, I think that they're just kind of like swirling underneath so much of like our kind of like mainstream culture in America anyways, because of our sort of historical obsession with those things. And so for me personally, when something like happened, or a number of things happened that sort of reminded me of potentially a kind of like a Gorgon experience of like turning somebody to stone upon seeing me, or like freaking somebody out by being there, was like it's just like the idea kind of like it immediately came up because those sort of narratives, that story was just like already there, kind of like in kind of like narrative ether.
Okay. Great. I did want to ask a follow-up question, but I'm not sure if it's a spoiler or not. There's kind of a moment of violence in On Acute One involving the Medusa hair. Do you think we should talk about it, or what do you think?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So at one point, the central character, who I think is somewhat autobiographical, is that fair to say, cuts off the heads of the snake that make up their hair. Yeah. How does that fit into this whole idea of monstrousness, maybe, that is happening in the book?
Yeah, I think it's like I mean, she's like okay, so in the story, she like turns this she's on a train trip across the country, like Amtrak train trip, and the Boy Scouts take Amtrak trains a lot to this like pilgrimage in Raton, New Mexico, I think it is, because they own a big piece of property out there. And generally, it was fun to have them on board. Like, I'm not trying to like build a sort of narrative of like good or bad or anything like that. They ordered pizza from the train that would get delivered to the train station that they would come to. Whatever, I thought.
And they share the pizza.
No.
No?
No, they didn't.
Oh well.
But very like this thing happens, and then. One of the Boy Scouts sort of like gets surprised to see Medusa on the train and turns to stone, right? And then has to get sort of dragged away by his friends, because this sort of like, I guess, metaphorical magic of turning the kid to stone doesn't happen to everybody. And then she freaks out, and so it's a sort of like self-mutilation. She goes down to the bathroom in the Superliner, one of the double-decker cross-country trains, and she cuts off all of the snake heads in the bathroom. And it's just a kind of like immediate, like impulsive decision in order to like just like assimilate right away, in order to like hide the thing that she sees as the reason that she turned the kid to stone, in order to like hide from the potential fallout of turning the kid to stone, to not turning anybody else to stone, and sort of like hide and blend in. As a metaphor for like, you know, passing, or anybody who sort of like feels other than kind of like any kind of place, trying to assimilate for good or for bad or for whatever.
Okay, thank you. There's another definition of myth, related but distinct from those ancient stories in our culture. Mimi, you refer to various Mitfords in mythological terms too, as when you refer to Unity's belief in Hitler and Nazism as a mythic quest, and when you call the Mitford family's compulsion to give everyone nicknames a form of self-mythologizing. Do you consider mything more of a process than this ancient repository of stories, or?
Well, every family self-mythologizes. You know, it happens in every single family. You know, that time we took Uncle Bert down to the creek and he fell in, you know.
Right.
So they were all great storytellers, and they all saw the potential for exaggerating whatever happened. I mean, it started with their father had been in both the Boer War and in World War I, and there was an artifact he brought back from World War I called an entrenching tool that still apparently had bits of gristle and hair from using to stab some German with that hung over the fireplace. So that was like...
Now that's a level of self-mythologizing you don't get in most families. So that's interesting that you should say that, because one of the things that your book is partially an autobiography of how you were inspired by sort of the Mitfords' kind of like fearlessness and entering into these different currents of history, for better or worse. Was there a particular sort of mythology that your own family had that you would call a myth? Or?
I mean, like I said, every family has that. I mean, when JFK was assassinated, I was in the first grade, and it was November 22nd, and I went home, and it was my older brother's birthday. He was 2 years older, and I just have this memory of it being like the saddest birthday ever, a birthday where we just all sat around the dinner table like, and he this is, like I said, this may be mythological, but in my memory, he got a bird and a watch. The bird died right away, and the watch stopped.
That's pretty good. Not an entrenching tool, but but pretty good. Ben, you wrote to me in an email that you're skeptical of these kinds of traditional notions of myth. I'm going to quote you directly from that email. You said, "As a storyteller, I enjoy legends, mythology, and YouTube clips of Joseph Campbell as much as any creative artist working today. All this said, a big component of my book is the examination of how our current culture's penchant for escapism has stunted our understanding of historical events like the Salem witch trials and the relevance of such an episode has in our modern day." Could you elaborate on this mistrust and sort of escapist quality of the mythic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from about 30 minutes north of Salem, and I've been working on this book for 10 years now. And it's been a long process, and about halfway through, I realized that my 10th great-grandmother, Mary Estey, was one of the last people hanged in Salem as an accused witch. I remember a car ride I was having years ago with my uncle, and I had found out this information, and I was telling him, and he was driving, and he got really uncomfortable, and he was like, "Were they really witches?" I'm like, no. It's very famously, if you remember the Crucible, they weren't witches because there's no such thing, and blah, 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 blah. And he still got very prickly, and he was still like, "I don't think we should be telling people this." And I was like, well, and I was trying to explain, the political relevance of Salem and all of that. And he's like, "I don't think I want my friends knowing. I don't really want this associated with our family name, blah, blah, blah." Mm-hmm. And so it really bummed me out, because I was thinking, like, Jesus, after 330 years, this year.
You think the statute of limitation has run out by then?
Exactly.
At what point did you say, "I'm writing a book about it"?
Yeah, it was after I told him that, too, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know."
Then you dedicated the book. Now I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sorry, Pete. But anyway, I think what happened in Salem, I think the political relevance, especially to our own despotic times, are really, I think, too great to overshadow with a kind of blend of pseudoscience and pseudohistory that has kind of stunted the city of Salem, as I know it, from perfect hindsight. You walk around, and the city has become kind of it's
kind of a Disneyland.
It's kind of a Disneyland. But people forget that people actually live there, and it's a tiny town, created in the 17th century. It wasn't meant to house or accommodate, 1.3 million tourists in the month of October alone.
Wow.
As a Halloween destination. And so I got kind of, it really bothered me, because I would be walking around and I would think, okay, none of this would be here if 25 innocent people hadn't been murdered. 19 men and women hanged, 5 people dying in prison, including a newborn baby. And Giles Corey, who was pressed to death, who I focus on in the book.
Right.
And, and as we're sitting here speaking and sitting in these chairs right now in India and Africa, we still have witch hunts in this world. It's not just, cancel culture. It's not just like any of that stuff that really makes this relevant. There are actual witch hunts going on. And, the word witch has always has developed over time simply as just the most convenient way of disposing of people that we don't like, in times of change and in times of economic, strife, and in times of, really great anxiety. People need to let off steam. The easiest way to do that is to demonize your neighbors and demonize people that have, for all the petty, mundane reasons that people, it's not actual sorcery. It's people going, well, I want your land, or, and the fact that people are still being accused of witchcraft across the Atlantic for the same reason that people in America and in Western Europe were accused. And the fact that, people are buying $80 wands in Salem without actually talking about or standing in solidarity with actual injustice that's still happening and the real political relevance. It really just tells me that this is a story that we all think we know, but we really don't, And so my attempt...
The image on the board right now is of Trump claiming that he was the victim of a witch hunt worse than the Salem witch trials when he was impeached and such.
Exactly.
So.
There you go.
Does anybody else want to chime in about that, about the dangers of sort of embracing myths in culture, or maybe even in families or in narratives? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I feel like the idea of a panel about history and myth is like in a certain way feels like oxymoronic, but on the other hand, it's what you're kind of getting at is like history is myth and memories are myth, and like what we make of them is will change with the time. So like I feel like there was a book that came out about the Salem witch trials a few years ago that tightly connected it to like wars with the Indians and the post-traumatic stress and like.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. They made it like it was. They're talking about it as like a refugee crisis too.
Yeah, it was.
Right.
It was a big catalyst. Yeah.
And like before that, it was analogized to the Red Scare. It's like wherever you are, you look at history in a different way and you mythologize it differently.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And there are other mythologies that exist in our culture that kind of like shape history so that they use it as a kind of political lever. For example, the idea of the self-reliant cowboy, let's say, or some other myth that exists in our culture like that.
I think in families too, it's been my experience as the only girl in a family of two boys and a girl. I always looked at envy at families that had sisters. I always desperately wanted a sister, and I would observe, people I knew who had sisters and get to know the rest of the sisters and everything. And there's this pattern of, there's always like the beautiful sister, the smart sister, the dutiful sister, and they're never the same one. It just always seems to fall in line.
I was just laughing because maybe your way of getting sisters was to mythologize the Mitfords, right? Yeah, because there were 6 women in that family and one boy.
Researching them all, and by the end I was like, maybe this whole sisters thing.
Yeah, maybe 6 is too many. We could, avoid the fascist ones if we were careful.
But the title of the book is "Do Admit: The Mitford Sisters and Me," and they would say there was a thing they would say to each other to like. They would argue, and it was like, "Oh, do admit, admit I'm right, on this," because I had 2 brothers who would never admit that I was right.
Let me follow up on that and on the sort of like porousness between defining myth and history by asking me a question. In your book, several of the Mitford sisters fall for a person or idea that promises worldwide transformation. Unity's obsession with Hitler leads her to become one of the Führer's best friends, while Diana remains a kind of unrepentant fascist to the grave.
Yes.
In her youth, Jessica embraces communism. Why do you think the Mitfords actively mythologized ideologies as much as they did their family dynamics?
Well, everything was sort of larger than life, and I think it started with Nancy, who was the oldest and a great storyteller, and they were just kind of like following her lead, and everything. Their father was larger than life. He was this. It's ironic because he was this blustering figure of this absolute kind of despot. He could be very warm and loving and very funny, but he could also he had real anger issues.
Right.
And Nancy sort of essentially defanged him from the beginning by making fun of him, and they all followed suit.
Right.
But then the men that they tended to go for were all kind of fell into that same pattern. I mean, except for Jessica, whose second husband was a wonderful husband.
Bob, yeah.
Wonderful husband, very supportive of her, wonderful father. And the rest of them just were like, the husbands were just like awful. I think they just, kind of like had imprinted on them the idea that men had to be these forceful creatures.
Right. And that forcefulness made them a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
And none of them, by the way, they all hated each other's husbands.
That might be a family dynamic. That's not the one. But invoking Hitler in the previous question shows that monstrousness is one of those categories that can straddle myth and history, since Hitler's name is now synonymous with, of course, mythic evil. But in your work, Frances, you gave us the point of view of aspirational monsters, right? A sensitive autobiographical Medusa, an ape who wants to be Eve, the first human female, to critique a society rather than a person or an ideology that lacks empathy, flexibility, and joy, that makes people feel wretched about themselves, right? What is it in your second graphic novel that you're currently working on? Why the Eve myth, and how does that help you sort of convey the message of a sympathetic rather than a monstrous monster?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is like, I'm trying to think about this because I started working on that book a long time ago. And the kind of idea that, like, it kind of starts with this idea that, right, if the rib from the first man outside of the man makes the first woman, and the rib from the first man inside of the first man can make the first man a woman inside of the first man. And so it's just like kind of like, the idea started out as a Christmas ornament idea. And then I just like kept thinking about it and I couldn't put it down. But what I really like about working on a story for a long time is, I mean, like, something that I've been learning, and I'm sure hopefully you know some of this, is that one of the processes of working on a story for a long time is actually trying to figure out how to like fall in love with it over and over and over again, because it's easy to lose touch with like the person who you were when you were originally sort of like generating the idea, and trying to understand who it is important to stay loyal to, and that's whether or not you're yourself in the present who's like slightly smarter than that person was in the past, or the person in the past who had the idea for the book in the first place. Because if you keep revising things, then you'll never make a book. But what it came to kind of feel to me to be about this monkey who declares himself the first human being, out of just like an impulse, not quite understanding what that sort of means, and that all of the animals around the first human being actually have these other understandings of what a human being is, and it's sort of, you come to realize that this is a story that is not about, that is not a simple sort of like queering of myth because it's fun to like do, but it's a story that is like, it's not the Eve, it's an Eve, one of many, who ends up actually kind of being this like Eve character representing one of the sort of many evolutionary dead ends of like humanity. Because in the story is about declaring human, being human. What does that mean? And how is that actually separating yourself from the animal kingdom? And what is important about that? And what is not important about that? And it just sort of like, the first human being stumbles upon this kind of like Old Testament magic logic that is just sort of like floating around in this sort of like prehistorical, primeval kind of like air, and kind of like transitions kind of by accident. And in a prehistoric sense, like, there is no gender among the animals in prehistory, but not in any sense that any of us would understand or would care about. And so where it really comes to pass is that the transition that Eve does by accident, by self-cannibalizing, makes her infertile. And so, like, it's something that is just like, you know, there's like, not being able to bear children is like, that's difficult. And so what this Eve figures out and kind of realizes that it was like, kind of, there's a tragedy in declaring yourself something so different
Yeah.
And I'm talking about humanity. I did want to make sure to leave the realm of like allegoricizing transition entirely, because this is a book about humanity that includes some sort of like transitional kind of like stuff in it. But to separate itself from the rest of the animals, the first human being realizes that it's alone, and not only is it alone, but it has created a situation in which it can't even make more children.
Yeah.
And so it has to try and figure out what to do with that. And so the ultimate thing is about trying to find other humans, because it fails to make other humans.
Right.
And it's about ignoring, or at least like abandoning the task of like legacy, right? Where we sort of attribute in our certain myth making that we all are a part of or not part of, attribute the creation of humanity to this like first generative couple.
Right.
And what if they are not the creator of humanity? What if they are the creation of humanity and then the end of humanity in their own lifetime? And what do you do with that kind of lifetime? And how do you sort of like find family and find other human beings when you can't make any of them, and there will not be any more of your type of human later on, because she kind of realizes that humanity is a slightly different one of fairy.
And to get away from the judgments of other characters, because one of the most moving things that I read in the excerpt from the book was, how she, this central character gets into a fight with the birds who are saying, "Well, you're dead."
Oh,
if you can't, it's like even, you're not generative, so you're not alive.
Right, exactly, right. And then all the different animals. So like all the different animals believe that she's died because she's sort of like it looked like she was going to die from the stomachache because she has this hallucinogenic indigestion. Bees because it's spooky at nighttime for daytime animals. And so they believe that the human character has died, but what the human character has done is transitioned overnight, and so now she looks kind of different.
Right.
And so they're like, oh, a new human. That's interesting. Did you know the old one? We think it might be dead. And then it kind of like, I think it's a kind of slapstick conversation where there's like a few different animals who are like, know what's happening, a few who don't know what's happening, and so she gets sort of like poised into believing that she's actually dead.
Right.
And then kind of like understands sort of like death and life to be something kind of different, but ends up being.
But that's another sort of, definitive kind of thing that gets questioned in the book, right? That is this, certain.
Yeah, because there's a character that's a ghost who dies very early on in the story and refers to its corpse as its father, and it's just sort of to prepare you to understand like creating other children or other like. And
interrogating those basic myths about what define us as human.
Correct.
Right. Hey, that was pretty good off the cuff.
You're the moderator.
Writing about history usually means doing research, and Ben and Mimi, both of your graphic novels end with extensive notes, bibliographies, etc. Besides discovering that your relative was involved in the trials, Ben, what was the most surprising fact both of you found out while you were doing research?
You go first.
Thinking about
one of the things I found out and there have been many books written by and about the Mitford sisters, and I found that the people writing about them tended to soft pedal Diana's hardcore fascism. She was truly unbelievably gorgeous until the end of her life. She was stunningly beautiful. She looked a bit like Carol Lombard. She did look like a goddess. And she used that. She rode that all the way to the end, and she was very charming. They all were terribly charming, and she used that charm. But then, among other things, they soft-pedaled the fact that after she and Oswald Mosley spent 3.5 years in prison in Britain under a wartime act that said if they suspected you of treason, they were just going to put you without a trial in prison. Right. And after the war, they started a publishing company that was very unsuccessful, except for one book they published called Stuka Pilot by a former Nazi fighter pilot.
Right.
And I Googled his name, and I discovered that he was responsible for spiriting Nazis out of Europe to South America after the war. And then they also...
And that's not mentioned in any of the previous Mitford biographies?
No.
Wow,
And
okay.
also, just only mentioned in passing was the idea that Oswald Mosley had after the world for a new united Europe that was called Europe a Nation, where all the European nations would unite, we would kick out anyone of color, and take complete control of Africa, of all the African colonies, take all the profits from those colonies and use the people in Africa as labor. You know, and it's like,
What could be more fascist?
what could be more fascist or awful? And that it just kind of like politely muttered in passing, if at all. And so, you know, they're just like utterly vile. And, you know, he attempted a comeback in the early 60s, which in running for office in England, which ended, of course, in a riot.
Right. The first way that I found out about Oswald Mosley was the Elvis Costello song "Less Than Zero," right? With "Here Comes Mr. Oswald" with a swastika tattoo, right? Ben?
Although I don't think
I'm
he
sorry.
was ever like a card-carrying Nazi. I think he was at odds with Hitler. He really wasn't all that keen on Hitler. He wanted support from Hitler, and Diana kept asking for donations for the British Union of Fascists that they never got from Hitler. They did get from Mussolini. But they had a fight after their wedding in Joseph Goebbels' living room because he didn't speak German at the time, and he felt overshadowed. And it was just, you know, an ego clash between him and Hitler. So yeah, the swastika tattoo might have been taking it a bit far. If he'd had a tattoo at all, it would have been the emblem of the British Union of Fascists.
Ben?
One of the reasons I did, you know, like 30 pages of author endnotes is really because the truth is so much stranger than fiction or anything. You know, it's crazier than anything Arthur Miller could have made up. you know.
Yeah, take that, Arthur Miller.
Yeah, take that, Arthur Miller.
You had a good thing.
That's right.
Destroyed it with marrow.
Shake a fist at him.
Yeah. But a thing that really surprised me was the kind of the aftermath, because you know in most pop culture representations, you know, movies or plays or TV shows, the last people are hanged and people kind of go, oh, maybe they weren't witches, and they get sad and they go home and that's the end. And there's no one there to say, well, what does this mean? Like, this has a meaning, this has consequences, this is a catalyst for something, but what does this mean? So I explored that. I found a newspaper clipping from 1953, and I was completely stymied because I hadn't found this in any books. There were steps in the 50s to exonerate some of the last remaining people. The Massachusetts government had not formally exonerated a good handful of these people.
And it was a class, right, that finally exonerated the last witch, right?
2016.
Yeah.
Yes. Or no, 2021.
Okay.
Finally,
yeah.
Yes. But in the 50s, they were trying to do it. And there was a senator named George Jelly Evans. His middle name was Jelly.
There's someone who's not self-mythologizing themselves, right? Go by the nickname Jelly.
And he...
Wait, that was his actual name, not like
That was his
George
actual
Shelley?
name. No, it wasn't in quotations. It was his real name. And he was quoted in this newspaper saying, apparently, in this meeting, and they did not vote on this because of this. He said, if we exonerate the last of the Salem witches, what's going to happen to our tourist trade? And that, I mean, because I had been researching the tourist trade, but I didn't know it was that early. So that was very eye-opening for me. Another eye-opening thing,
And
too.
they're just women, you know.
I know, yeah. And a handful of that, yeah.
That's right. You also talk a little bit about Lovecraft in the notes, and do you think this a similar kind of mythologizing of him is going on in Providence?
Yes. Lovecraft came to Salem in the 1920s and vowed to explore the place from end to end. But he was very, very much, he modeled his fictional town, Arkham, on on Salem. It's less hilly than Arkham is, but the layout of the streets are kind of very similar. But Lovecraft had been reading a bit of pseudo-history from the time, which was Margaret Murray's book, The Witch Cults of Western Europe, which is a very damaging book. It's a really terrible book, and it's caused a lot of damage. But this was a book. Margaret Murray was a Egyptologist who took records from the witch hunts of Western Europe and also America at face value. She just took them literally. So, to her mind, there was actually a clandestine pre-Christian, pagan religion of witches, and everybody, who was accused of witchcraft and, in the early modern period were actual witches, and they still exist, and blah, blah, blah. This was a big influence on Gerald Gardner, who in the 1940s and 50s developed the religion of Wicca. They were very good friends, he and Margaret Murray. So all of this actually comes from 19th century German Romanticism, which also created some other not very pleasant things, but
kind of a tie-in.
Yeah,
that's right.
This
incredible team up here.
Yeah, right. The idea of ancient Aryans and things like that, and there was this myth that 9 million
Valhalla and all
that. 9 million, real witches were burned at the stake as heretics in the burning times, and it's just not true. It wasn't 9 million people. It was about 15,000 or 50, maybe 45,000 people, executed, and they were all hanged because witchcraft was considered a federal case because you were accusing somebody of basically you were accusing somebody of allowing the devil to appear in your appearance to physically harm you. So it wasn't heresy. It wasn't like you were a member of some other religion. No. This was a physical crime, so it was a capital offense, which was hanging. And of course, there's no proof that any of these people were actually witches. And those who confessed to it this was probably after severe torture, right, or the threat of it. So Lovecraft kind of took all of this, at face value as well. He bought into the idea of there being witch cults in New England and that these might still exist. And so his fiction is full of that. And so that's part of my job of unpicking everything, is going, okay, Lovecraft, you weird, wonderful racist. I disagree with you on many things, and this is one of them. But yeah, that's one of the parts of this book or this story where the myth is more known than the reality, and that needs to be fixed.
Great, thank you. Since Tongues is myth-inspired fiction, Anders, it doesn't demand maybe as much empirical research as Mimi and Ben have done, but your book is filled with whole-page ornamentations and designs, not dissimilar from Mimi's book that also has these full pages when you're sort of introducing a character or introducing a concept. But in particular, Anders, you include odd panel borders, abstract patterns, etc. Is it accurate to say that these avant-garde pages occur when the book is most mysterious, when you withhold rather than convey narrative information to us? Is that fair?
So in what you're showing, I would say that's true on the image on the left.
Okay.
Where I am definitely
right,
trying to sort of get things to feel a little dreamlike and mysterious and sort of pregnant with weirdness.
Admittedly, the other one is very good sort of summation of just how often the eagle visits Prometheus, right?
Right, and it's part of that. So that page is sort of my solution for trying to depict the passage of deep time, kind of.
Right.
It's an attempt. It's supposed to be read in a spiral from the top left, and it's like the years are passing by 79 years at a time or something. And it's just supposed to give you a feeling of like the eternity of
This endlessness of this process, right?
So yeah, and again, it's like I am trying to like I'm taking these myths and these stories, and I am sort of superimposing them on our history. So there is a sense of like what you're talking about, sort of investing this sense of mystery or the sense of enigma or whatever, and to imbue that with our lives and our
Specifically wartime in the Middle East, right? No?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Like a lot of the story is set in basically like Afghanistan, Pakistan, not by name, but yeah, also just sort of like, I mean, so drawing that page and like writing all those dates, it was totally fascinating to just think about like, you know, the distance between each number is longer than my lifetime. I don't really have any association with almost any of those years until you get to like the last 2 or 3. You know, I have a pretty good sense of history and the world and how things have unfolded over the last few thousand years, but it's still just like sort of trying to reconcile yourself to the vastness of even just a few thousand years, like not even counting, you know, like the book does actually go back to like, well, Eve, the first monkey that decides it's a human. So like, yeah, that was super instructive and like a fun just like how to use the language of comics to try to convey these ideas and this sense of like the vastness of time or whatever.
Cool. Thank you. I have one final question, and we'll start with you, Anders, but I want to ask this of all the panelists. In your Comics Journal interview about tongues earlier this year, Anders, you talked about bringing back a character from Dogs and Water, the unnamed American who walks with a backpack and the teddy bear tied to the backpack. Why bring him back as a character? Why is he a favorite of yours? And then as an extension to everybody else on the panel, I'd like you to consider, is there an image or a character or a panel that is your favorite and why in your most recent book?
So there's a very specific reason why that character is in the story, and that is, so Dogs and Water was my first book. Came out in
2004 was the first version, yeah.
And of all my books, it is the one that has had the most interest from like filmmakers. So I periodically get random emails from people expressing interest in turning it into a movie, none of which ever panned out. But at some point,
Hollywood.
Yes, right. At some point, it got far enough where I actually wrote a screenplay. But it's a fairly thin book, so I had to add stuff, and I talked to the director about like stuff to add, and he suggested this one scene where a sort of military caravan passes by this character in the middle of nowhere, and there's a very brief interaction, but it just kind of like passes by and that's it.
Right.
And he suggested, what if one of the vehicles stopped, and like there was an actual interaction with these whatever military people. So I wrote that scene.
Right.
Movie didn't get made. So it just got stuck in a drawer, or I guess on my hard drive. But I really liked it. I really liked the scene. And so when my career kept going, I finished Big Questions, I finished all these other projects that I had, so I just kind of was at a point of like, what am I gonna do next? What kind of book am I gonna embark on? And that was one little half-finished piece that I felt like, I don't know where this would go. Like, the other thing I wanted to work with was the myth of Prometheus. These things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. but like it could be really interesting to sort of cram them together and sort of see
what happens.
See what happens.
Cool. Favorite character, image, panel?
Okay, well, Anders got me thinking about stories that didn't seem to fit in anywhere else, and you wanted to put it in somewhere. I have one other particular page I'll talk about after this, but
That's fine.
there was a story I had done as a freestanding story that I didn't know what to do with it, and that was the story of my going to see the prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Yes. Assassin.
Which only has to do with the Mitford sisters in that Jessica Mitford and her cousin went to Spain to cover the Spanish Civil War as journalists, and I just used that to hook into my experience at age 12 of going to see the movie The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie that came out in like 1968 with Maggie Smith playing Miss Jean Brodie, who's this very domineering, charismatic teacher in a girls' school in Edinburgh. And as we watch the movie, we see her trying to mold the lives of these young girls, and we discover she's a fascist sympathizer. And how wrong that is and everything. It's really warped and leads to terrible consequences. But then my experience of seeing it was that after there's a part in the movie where one of the students winds up sleeping with the art teacher, and I was 12. I don't know why I was allowed to see this. I was walking home from the library, and the classic bully from my class rode up on his Stingray bike and started circling me. And I happened, and this is something I was unnerving to me when I watched the movie. I looked like the main girl in the book. I had these kind of horn rim glasses and the same length of hair. And he started circling me and going, ha ha, ha ha, Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. I was like, how does he know?
I liked it in the book when you Googled him to find out what happened to him, and he was in prison and stuff, right?
Of course he's in prison. I didn't know what else to do with that story, but it fit in the narrative, so I just stuck it in there. I mean, they begged me to put it in. They'd already seen it at Drawn and Quarterly. They were like, oh, you have to. And then there's one other page that for me is like one of the most visceral things I've ever done, and that is Jessica Mitford's infant daughter died in a measles epidemic, and there's a page of a room with an empty crib, and the windows open, and the curtains are blowing back, and it's just kind of like, gives you the willies.
Yeah.
And it really, maybe that hooks into after the earthquake in Los Angeles in 1993, when it happened at like 4:30 in the morning, and the power was out, pitch black, and we had about a year-and-a-half-old son in his room, and I got up and I couldn't even get to the door because it was like being inside a cardboard box when you're a kid, like a refrigerator box, and the kids are on the outside pushing it around. It was just like that. And I was like, finally got to his room, and it was like feeling around in his crib for him, and I couldn't find him, and he was like just curled up asleep in the corner.
Oh, wow.
But it kind of like made me flash back on that and like what it was.
Just that terror.
Yeah, the terror.
Ben?
Favorite?
Yeah, character, panel, image that you drew for the book?
There's a bit of the book where at the beginning of the book I've got a page kind of just showing people going about their daily lives.
Yeah.
And on the left-hand page you've got clergymen and ministers in 1692 in Salem, and they're doing their thing. They're getting ready for bed or kissing their children goodnight or whatever. And on the right-hand page is what some other people are doing, at that time of day, they're coming home from someplace, or you've got George Jacobs, this old farmer who needs 2 giant canes to walk. His canes are leaning up against a table, and he's got a glass of brandy, and he's asleep by the fireplace, and you've got John Proctor next to his house, coming home or feeling for rain or something like that. And then later on in the book, that's February of 1692, and by the time you get to August, much later on, I kind of did a thing where I thought, all right, what if I duplicate that page? But everyone on the left side, the clergymen, the ministers, they're still going about their business, kissing their children goodnight or whatever. But on the other side of the page, well, George Jacobs has been hanged, so his canes are leaning up against the fireplace. But
Empty,
he's gone.
yeah.
And John Proctor's house is there, but his wife is in prison and he's been hanged. So I kind of, in some weird way, I thought, I wonder if this is a nice way of allowing the reader to miss these characters, which is a hard thing to do when it's 330 years later, missing someone who's been dead for that long. But no, I felt good about that because I thought, this is good. Let them feel the absence of these people, because they had families who are also missing them.
It's evocative.
Yeah.
It's kind of a page from Dickens, from Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
That's true. It's true.
Tiny Tim.
Frances?
Yeah, I think that when I first started writing stories in general, premise and metaphor and the kind of and showing off my ideas of what could happen in a story and it could mean this symbolically was the kind of most important thing to me. And then it was over the course of doing that a bunch of different times, and it's this book that I'm working on now, the Give My Best Your Kind about the monkey thief, where I started to actually appreciate characters and actually letting characters, letting people change over time in front of you, and watching that happen through their dynamics. That I started to actually get really interested in that, and so there's a scene in the new book after so much exposition and so much complaining and yowling of the main monkey character who is denying himself food, and which relieves to him barbecuing, butchering himself and eating himself because it's the only thing that he can eat, because if he eats other animals then he'll turn back into an animal, but the other animals tell him that because they don't want to be eaten. And so all of this chaos has happened, all these conversations about what it means to eat yourself and that you should eat yourself so that you don't eat one of us and all this kind of stuff. And he's used the knife that the octopus has created out of a meteorite and all of this stuff. And it's during this time where it's the afternoon and the monkey is barbecuing the ribs, so it takes time to kind of slow cook delicious ribs. As we all know. And so all the animals are just kind of laying around and doing different stuff because they're just sort of waiting for the drama to continue and waiting for the ribs to be ready so that you can eat them and then become more human and do the whole thing, but it takes time to cook. And so they're all just kind of laying around, and there's this there's these two birds, lovebird and wovebird, and their chemistry is just my favorite thing. Because they're so silly, but they both care about different, what they care about is so important. And they're all just kind of laying around in the grass waiting for this thing to happen, and Lovebird says I think I'm gonna start chewing gum. And then Lovebird just kind of sits up and looks at her and thinks for a second and then lays back down and goes, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think that I could fall in love with you all over again. And because Lovebird is I think my personality could handle becoming a gum chewer.
That's right. It can be expansive enough to encompass that in your
I think that
in your image. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so and then that's when the lovebird is just yeah, I think that I could handle this sort of this correction to your personality and then fall in love with you all over again. And so it was just and then there's the bear talking about other things, and the dog's ghost tries to actually die and ascend, but then the bear trapped. It was just this moment where the drama wasn't happening, it had to wait, and all that could happen were moments of character.
And also moments of self-realization, right? If the drama's not happening and you're not being told not to do things, you start to think about what you could do.
Yeah, right. And so that's what's been really fun. So like going forward, I guess like my favorite opportunities are these things where like the thing is not happening, and so you actually just have to show a little insight, kind of to like pass the time in the book, show something about the other characters, like and how they interact with each other and stuff like that.
Right.
So I like that.
Great.
Fun scene to do.
You like that process?
I like the process. I like the characters. I don't want plot anymore.
Do we have time for a couple of questions from the audience? I know it's getting kind of late. Okay, how about 2 questions from the audience real quick, and then we'll call it a day. Please go to the microphones and ask those questions, since this session is being recorded if you have a question to ask.
Hi, so I had a question, I think, based on kind of how we're talking about myth from kind of a more traditional sense. I think this would be more for Anders and Frances, but I mean, anyone can kind of answer. Is the idea that when we do take like ancient myths and stories and kind of try and modernize them, we mostly go with either, Greco-Roman, occasionally Norse, even less so Egyptian, but there are so many other stories and myths from other cultures that usually we don't use. And I wanted to just ask why you think that is. Because there are all of these great stories from, like all of these other myths that kind of just get sidelined for, hey, let's talk about, Prometheus or Medusa again.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% a fair observation / criticism. I think for me, those are the myths I grew up with. Those are the myths that are like ingrained and into my brain, and so they're the ones that work for me. It is interesting though to go and sort of take those myths seriously and sort of insert them into history, because if gods are real, they probably aren't culturally specific. And so there is some, I attempt to kind of do some playing with like the names of the gods and the fact that they don't actually fit or reflect our ideas of them, and that, they may have, their names may be sort of mashed up with a similar deity from a different culture, from a different continent. But yeah, I mean, I would say that in general for me, it's just like, those are the stories that are sort of the foundation of my own storytelling, and so they're the ones that I go to. I'll just say really briefly, I taught some comics workshops in Thailand, and it was fascinating. I did a lot of like sort of stream of consciousness image generation with the students, and it was super fascinating how completely different the stuff that they went to was, and like the way that they mythologized their own ideas and their own culture. It was just strikingly different than what I have ever encountered teaching in the West, or in the way that I am habituated to mythologize or create content.
Can you give any examples?
Specifically, there was a lot of characters ingesting one another and vomiting one another up. I feel like we tend to personify animals, and people, they were personifying foods and appliances and stuff. It was just like a different, clearly it's just a different sort of way of approaching the world. And
Modern appliances?
yeah, toasters and stuff, yeah. So like we do that too, but it just was there, the emphasis was striking.
And the ingesting vomiting immediately think of the Greeks.
Yeah, roar.
Sure.
We go straight back to the Greek myths.
Right. There definitely are commonalities.
I hate to cut off Frances or anything, but I think it is 6 o'clock and there might be another panel coming in, so I don't want to hold anybody here. Why don't you just tell everybody in the audience where you're going to be so that they'll visit you on the floor? Does everybody know their table number? Or?
Well, I don't know the table number. It's drawn in quarterly, and I'll be there right after this signing more books. I also have merch, Mitford merch, tea towels, coasters, and these beautiful pens that I have. So I'd be happy to sign any books.
I'm at the top shelf table. I think that's W56. We're against the wall by the entrance.
And I'm W66, yeah, near the entrance.
I7A.
Okay, thank you.